Welcome back to Star Trek, everyone. That's right, we're talking Star Trek Lower Decks, the third season, episode 5, Reflections. If you are new here and you don't want spoilers, you might want to bow out now, but before you leave, please consider leaving a like, share, subscribe, all those fun things, or just leave a comment below on what you thought about this episode and why you hate me, all those fun things. But let's crack along into Reflections. And if you've been following along with some of my previous videos for this season, aside from the premiere, I've been fairly let down and disappointed by what I've been seeing. This episode, at least in my estimation, was more of a return to form, and I actually enjoyed this a lot more than just what I seem to think of as filler episodes, just chock full of Easter eggs for the sake of it. This episode obviously had tons of callbacks and Easter eggs to prior Star Trek. I'm not even going to begin to go through all of them, but I do think that the storylines, I should say, in this episode definitely felt like we actually had some meat on the bone, and that's, in my opinion, what's been missing from the prior 3 or 4 episodes of this season, but mostly the last 3. Cracking along, we start off with Rutherford. He's having some nightmares. Good to see him back taking the spotlight. It's been a while since he's had more of a lead story going on, and it's nice to see that. They're going to do some sort of tech stuff on a planet to upgrade a sensor system or something. That's beside the point, not really part of the story whatsoever. Rutherford is having these problems with his implant/nightmares, and Boimler and Mariner are going to go down to the planet to do some recruitment for Starfleet. That's mostly where the humor of this episode comes in. The Rutherford story, well, it does have a few humorous moments, as more of a actual dramatic plot-driven story, which is kind of a fun thing to have in this show. We've got the callback here. I do like that they always have the callbacks to the animated series in this show, giving that a lot of love where we don't see that primarily in Star Trek. And they're going down, as I said, to do their recruitment drive. It's kind of like a college jobs drive or something like that on the planet. Boimler and Mariner, under the direct command of Ransom, are to try and get any recruits to join Starfleet at their little tent. Back on the ship, Rutherford finally has his implant thing come to a head, and it turns out somebody has taken over his body. And this is not just your normal somebody. He thinks it's some sort of interphasic alien or something like that, but no, it actually turns out to be himself. A backup 10-year prior version of himself. Basically, the Rutherford we never met in the show prior to having whatever occurred to him that caused that implant to happen. Down on the planet, we've got Mariner getting a little freaked out because this is not what she wants to do, but she needs to give it her all in order to impress Ransom. Boimler obviously being his typical self. The humor from this episode comes a little later when he is the one that finally gets pushed over the edge and has to fight back because they're basically being treated as trash. Everyone's making fun of them, mocking them, basically Starfleet sucks. We've got a few callbacks here. We've got the Archaeologist Guild. That's obviously a callback to both Picard and Vash in TNG and also slightly in DS9. Then we've got a bunch of other people in there. We've got the Collectors Guild, or whatever they're called, the people that kidnapped Data. We've actually seen them on Lower Decks a couple times before. And there's some other characters and callbacks that I'm not going to go through all of them. It was nice to see all of these things kind of feeling like they made sense insofar as they weren't just chucked in for the sake of it. They did have a reason for being here, even if it doesn't really hold up to scrutiny. But like I said, this is basically the only source of comedy in the episode, because when we get back to Rutherford here, it's more of a dramatic, serious type thing. It's not over-the-top seriousness. Anyways, when we cut back to the ship, we see Rutherford here fighting with himself. He's got this internal battle going on between the Rutherford we know and the one that's taken over his body, which is a more brash, less evolved, kind of a cocky, jock-esque type of person, which is the Rutherford of 10 years ago, Rutherford we've not come to know before. And after the body is taken over and he tries to escape off the ship, trying to figure out what's going on, he's captured, brought to sickbay, and they have this sort of mindscape thing going on here, where old Rutherford meets new Rutherford, and they get to actually discuss what's going on with themselves. They get to meet and kind of come to terms with who is who and what's going on. It is very interesting here to see we have the older version of Rutherford in an older style version of the Starfleet uniform. I think this is more a Voyager era cadet uniform. It's got the silver on the bottom instead of the black. And I think that's what we saw in DS9, especially when we had those cadets on Red Squad or Red Squadron, whatever they were called. So I think that was what we were supposed to believe here, or it was some sort of experimental thing, because as we'll come to learn shortly, there is more to discover than meets the eye. So they have this discussion here. Old Rutherford is a brash superstar as far as engineering. He's designing his own rockets, his own engines. He's basically doing the pod racing thing. He's getting funds for building his own ships through winning races through the Devron system, which, as we know, is part of the Romulan neutral zone area. So that's very dangerous and very lucrative if they're able to survive that. That is what Rutherford was up to back in the day. Absolutely completely different from the Rutherford we know now, and our Rutherford doesn't even remember this. So they decide to come up with this sort of battle for the body, I guess. Which mind is going to take control? The new Rutherford, which is a result of the implant, or the original Rutherford, which is some sort of backed up copy of his personality that was logged in there 10 years prior. They decide they're going to do a race. They can each design whatever mental, they're in a mindscape. They can do whatever the hell they want. So they're going to design their own ships, have a race, and decide who wins. Our Rutherford basically creates an exact replica of the Delta Flyer. He's a huge fanboy of that, and he's always wanted one. The other Rutherford, the prior one, builds this super sleek, cobbled together from various superstar parts. Like, you know what? You built a Starfleet model of a ship when you could build anything you wanted. I'm clearly going to beat you here because I'm better than you. Then they have the race, and it's kind of an interesting race. It's nice to see this in animation because they can add a lot more elements than what we were normally allowed to see when we have these space races in sci-fi shows. I'm thinking back to the space race that this is clearly a reference to in Voyager, as well as a space race we saw that was kind of similar to that in Stargate. They're very cool, but you can't actually show a lot. So if you go back and watch those episodes, a lot of it is actually, looking at screens and in the cockpit. So we actually get to see a lot of the race here, more so than we would. And since this is the mental domain of Rutherford, you can create whatever you want. He decides to crew his ship with his friends. And as we all know, the power of friendship is going to give him the advantage over the other Rutherford that he needs to become victorious in this mind race. One thing I do want to note, which is actually two things, I very much love the fact that they brought the Voyager flight suits back. They've always been one of my favorite designs of a Starfleet uniform, and we only, I think, saw them maybe twice prior to this, only in Voyager, and I really like them. And it's great to see them getting a little respect here. And the comm badges. We saw this on older Rutherford, but the comm badges on these uniforms are era appropriate to Voyager. They actually match the older style comm badge that would have been worn at the time these flight suits were designed in Voyager. That is also a wonderful touch. I always like seeing the older style comm badges. And I say older style, they're not the oldest style. They're not back to the round TNG. They're the square with a little cutout. So that's my era. That's what I love. So I also put this in here because I wanted to show the various pieces. We've got the older style Rutherford cadet uniform. We've got the newer style flight suit uniform, as well as the comm badge. So these are just all little details that really put this over the top for me because they didn't have to do that. They could have gone any which way, and they decided to actually bring back some fantastic uniforms that have been lacking, in my opinion. They've never gotten the respect they deserve. Now we finally figure out the crux of this, the Rutherford problem. There was an accident. Something exploded. Rutherford was incredibly damaged. Look at him. And this was a sanctioned, some sort of undercover operation. We see here that there's some shady people doing this surgery on him. They're implanting false memories, erasing the memories he had of whatever undercover project he was working on. And they're putting this implant in and basically giving him a false memory that he had that as an elective surgery to increase his engineering acumen or something along those lines. So this was all done somewhat covertly. I'm wondering if this has any sort of Section 31 relationship, or if it's just going to be a cocky rogue engineer who didn't want to get himself in trouble. I don't know where we're going with this. I hope whatever comes out of this isn't just a laugh-a-minute joke fest. It's not played for laughs. It really seems like a serious thing we're trying to develop the character. And that is one thing that was very vital in this episode, is we got some character growth. We got a lot of backstory and growth with Rutherford. We got a little bit with Mariner. So obviously she's trying to do her Starfleet thing to impress Ransom. Boimler himself has grown a bit in this episode too. He kind of freaked out and didn't stay all buttoned up as we've seen throughout the series, but that actually impressed Ransom. Ransom was very impressed by the fact that he was willing to stand up for Starfleet in such a way. So I think Boimler's getting a little bit of growth here. He's growing from the by-the-book, brown-nosed kind of guy into a more impulsive person. So if he can marry those two personalities, he might become the Starfleet officer he's always wanted to be. This is the archaeologist character that was kind of a Vosh takeoff, and she was, in essence, at this career fair to create a distraction in order to steal back the Grand Nagus staff, which is being kept in a museum, in order to sell it back to the Ferengi for a huge amount of profit. She was impressed with Mariner. She actually thinks that if Mariner ever decides to ditch Starfleet, she would make a fantastic partner. Now, I don't know if they're trying to do some sort of space adventure rogue type thing, or if she meant partner in a romantic sense, as we've seen, especially in last episode, or maybe it was 2 episodes ago at this point. Mariner is at least bisexual, so she would theoretically be interested in this character. So I don't know where that's going. There was a lot of setup and a lot of growth with our main characters. The only one who didn't really get a chance in this episode to go on her own journey of self-discovery or grow at all is Tendi, but she kind of had her own subplot prior where she was coming into her own. So if we add those all up, our 4 main characters have gone through growth, development, and had some backstory explained to us in this season. And that's something that I think the show needs to continue doing. It can't just be a lighthearted 22 minutes of Easter eggs to last the long term. If they keep adding in these fine character moments and letting us love and grow with our characters, develop them, move them along their path, then the show is becoming something even more special than what it is if it's just an Easter egg-a-thon. So that is what the show has been missing, in my opinion, these past few episodes, and that is what the show gave us in this episode distinctly. So I very much enjoyed this. Maybe my favorite episode of the season, although that first episode with all the First Contact callbacks was fun, but this had more meat on the bone, so I think this is probably the best of the season so far. What do you think? Do you like this episode? Are you enjoying Lower Decks, or can you not really get into it? Let me know all your thoughts below, and until next time, computer and program.